So we have corrected the AI. The AI can learn a lot from us, I think, because we are much smarter.
Okay, I think we should start.
Wonderful. Okay, so welcome everyone to the third ICSA webinar today on May 7th on governance and dynamics of communal living. So I have the honor to guide you through this webinar and welcome all who is part of ICSA, and especially today our two presenters, Diana Leafe Christian and Stephen Lloyd-Moffett. I hope I have pronounced your names also correctly. So, and we thought that this topic of governance and dynamic living is one that is very central in, communal living. And I have prepared a brief citation that I have taken out of the Encyclopedia of Community from 2005 on governance and communities. And for me, it was interesting because this was a very broad frame they started with to introduce this topic. And they wrote, most contemporary intentional communities govern themselves through some form of participatory democracy, such as majority rule voting or consensus decision-making. And some have or have had a single leader and a hierarchical system of governance. And I think our presenters today can tell us much more also what has popped up or developed over the last decades in terms of governance and community, especially sociocracy, of course. And for me, it was interesting during my field research and also in our academic discussions on intentional communities that we often concluded that new, more democratic models of governance and decision-making are probably the main innovations coming out of intentional communities. And this is really something strong. And I think governance is a very central topic to communal living. And of course, communities have a lot of innovations they have come up with in the areas of food production, ecological building, whatever. And governance is definitely a very central and interesting one. So I really welcome you at this topic. And before we dive into the presentations, I just briefly will introduce ICSA to those who do not know ICSA. So ICSA is the International Communal Studies Association here, and some of my colleagues from the board are here today, like Anton, Jan, and Thaisa, and Beatrice, who have also prepared our webinar series here. And ICSA is a forum for exchanging scholarship, information, ideas, experiences of intentional communities, and this already for more than 40 years. So you see here previous conferences, live conferences, and we have another one next year that will be announced after the webinar. And you can become a member here. You will find the information on the website here, ixacommunity.org. You will receive a newsletter, a bulletin. The webinars are for free, and other advantages you can get here with the membership fee. So I hope you will have a look and check this out. And these were the two last webinars we have had already. And today we have governance and dynamics of communal living. So now let's dive into the webinar. And we will start with Diana as the first presenter. So Diana is for decades already an internationally recognized author, speaker, and trainer on intentional communities and governance, also especially. And she trains sociocracy and many important tools for communal living. So her notable book, or several books, but this one I really can recommend a lot. Yeah, Creating a Life Together. That's very hands-on and popular. And other books like Finding Community. So for 14 years, she also edited the Community magazine, and she's a long-term member and lives in Earth Heaven Eco Village in North Carolina. And she received, for example, the Geoff Kotzeni Award for her contribution to the intentional community movement for all these decades. So I'm very honored to welcome Diana, and I'm pretty sure we will have a wonderful presentation now for about 20-25 minutes. I will give you a sign after around 20 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Iris. Okay, let's just go to the slideshow right now. So this slideshow is about the topic of our webinar today, and I've titled it Positive Community Dynamics and Community Governance and Decision Making. Oh, so here are some of the things that positive community dynamics can include. Learning and practicing nonviolent communication. Many of you may be familiar with nonviolent communication. Its objective, according to Marshall Rosenberg here, the man who created it, is to establish relationships of kindness and empathy and honesty and help people meet their needs. Another one is to have effective project management to manage physical and administrative work tasks and reduce conflict. A whole lot of people who create new intentional communities of any kind, communes, which are income sharing, co-housing communities, eco-villages, urban, rural, and in between, do not know that you don't just sing kumbaya in the meadow and throw around frisbees and have a wonderful time, but in fact, you need to manage the physical and administrative work tasks. So it can include using the restorative circles process for conflict resolution. And so here are some of the questions that restorative circles facilitators sometimes use to ask the people who are parties to a conflict. So I highly recommend restorative circles. And of course, permaculture design for the physical landscape. This is David Holmgren's 10 basic principles of permaculture, which are quite wonderful, I think. And founders in intentional communities, here's another effective community management method, which creates a positive community dynamic, is that the founders need to share their must-haves and their non-negotiables with all potential founders and members. So some founders might have the must-have, non-negotiable, no dogs in our upcoming community. And other founders might say, we must have dogs, we love dogs. If the first founders do not tell the other members what their non-negotiables are, people are going to be upset, aren't they? Especially dog lovers. So the founders and early members generally tell each other. The founders tell the earliest co-founders, and then they tell the next co-founders, and then they get so busy creating community together because there's so much to do when you're creating a new community, they can forget to tell the rest of the incoming co-founders and the early members and all the rest of the members. Has this ever happened? Oh, yes. So here's another example. We will be vegan, of course. No, says some people, I thought we were going to be vegetarian. I want us to have a vegetarian community. Oh, no, we're going to be omnivores and anybody can eat anything. Oh, we're going to be zoned commercial residential. Oh, no, we're going to be zoned residential only because that's cheaper and there's so many more available residentially zoned sites here in our big urban city. Oh, did I forget to tell you I wanted us to get a community that's going to be residential commercial, because that way we can have little businesses on site, because that was part of my original vision. I, the founder, why didn't you tell us that? Wait, you didn't tell us that? Oh, no, we can't be vegetarian or omnivores. Oh, no, we need to be vegan. Didn't you, did I not, did you not? Well, we thought we told it. Well, we didn't tell you. Oh, yeah. Well, do you like a vegan diet? Okay, then there's this one. What? You have dog? No, you can't bring Fido and Fluffy and Rufus to the community. We're not gonna have any dogs here. Wait, you didn't tell us that. So this is what can happen. Oh, wait, I missed it. The people can be very upset with the founders. Therefore, an aspect of good community process and effective management is, say, founders, be sure and tell people. Another, excuse me for a minute, I'm going to turn off my audio.
Okay, so just to use this pause, if you have questions, you're invited to drop them in the chat already if you want. But of course, you have also the opportunity to post them directly. Just wanted to mention that. So
Thank you.
hope you.
I'm finished coughing, so I'll now resume. Okay, so this can create a lot of conflict. What else can create conflict is to rely on classic traditional consensus as governance and decision-making method. Why? Why? What's wrong with it? Well, we'll get into that. Most consensus advocates believe that is the very best thing you can use, classic traditional consensus, because they will say, and they ardently, truly believe this, if you use classic traditional consensus, you will have more fairness and kindness and harmony in your group. Yeah? Good, huh? Well, I think Yoda has the right idea that this is not actually true. This is more like a wished for thing or an imagined, envisioned thing, but not actually real life. So let's talk about the consensus and conflict merry-go-round. And here's how it goes. You use classic traditional consensus because you've been told by community consultants and consensus trainers that it will build trust and harmony in the group. So you will then experience some community demoralization from the conflict that arises from using classic traditional consensus. Why? Because when we're all in agreement, it works beautifully. And we can say to all of our consensus advocates and community consultants, oh yes, consensus creates harmony and trust and goodwill. But when you don't agree, and one or more people block a proposal that most other people want, or a whole lot of people worked months on, then you have conflict. And you're supposed to just rise up to a more noble level than you actually have in your actual consciousness and make it be okay. But you could be dismayed to discover that, in fact, the method that you've been sold by these really well-meaning community consultants does not, in fact, create more trust and harmony in your group. So then you wonder, oh gosh, what's wrong with us? Are we a bad community? So then you get a conflict resolution method to resolve the frequent conflict and demoralization that the group experiences. And you keep on asking, what's wrong with us? And so then you believe what the community consultants and consensus trainers tell you. Experiencing conflict is desirable because understanding and resolving your conflicts will help you know, understand, and feel emotionally connected to other community members. Isn't that great? If you can resolve a conflict. And a community needs conflict, they say, for people to truly trust and be connected to each other. So you have to ignore your inner voice that goes, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. Conflict hurts. If your community's conflict resolution method doesn't often work well and you don't resolve most conflicts, you will likely feel even less understanding, trust, and sense of connection. You will probably experience more harsh or passive-aggressive behaviors and therefore lower participation in meetings and community social events. And some community members will want to actually leave the community. So now we have to call in a consultant to get some consulting and mediation because we have a problem in our community. Okay, here comes a consultant. And if the community consultant doesn't resolve a conflict, we become even more demoralized. We lose even more members' participation in meetings and social events. And worst case, some people actually do get up and leave. So we keep on using classic traditional consensus because we still believe, let me spell correctly. Wait a second. even against the evidence we've just had, that classic traditional consensus builds trust and connection in a group. And we continue to believe this no matter how much our community suffers, because the experts say so. So now this is like a washing machine cycle, rinse and repeat. We continue to experience this classic traditional consensus and conflict cycle over and over again, the merry-go-round, year after year. No matter how many people stop attending our meetings, no longer participate in social gatherings, or just pack their bags and leave. Well, here's an antidote. And the antidote is to use a modified form of consensus or sociocracy instead. So in my experience, I've been working in community informal research, not academic research like you all, but, you know, interviewing people and taking notes and visiting lots of communities. I've visited more than 170 worldwide, and I've been intensely studying, advocating, researching, and being a community consultant for and speaking at conferences and so on for 35 years. What I found is that we have more tense and conflict prone meetings when we use traditional classic consensus. And we have more harmonious meetings in communities when we use modified consensus or sociocracy. Well, what are modified forms of consensus? In the Google Drive folder that Iris will send you the link for and that we can put into the chat, you'll find a handout about the in-street consensus method, which was invented by the in-street co-housing folks in Davis, California. And it's classic traditional consensus, but when you get to the decision point of calling for consensus, you call for consensus. And when you do, if no one blocks, then or as you say in Europe, vetoes, then the proposal passes. But if some people do block, you tell them, oh, yes, okay, what are your reasons? Thank you. You put it in the minutes. This is just like classic traditional consensus. And then you say, okay, as you know, because we told you this when you joined the community, when people block a proposal, the people who have blocked it and several advocates for the proposal get together in a series of solution-oriented meetings between now and the next business meeting to come up with a new proposal that addresses the problem we're trying to solve. Because what's a proposal for? It's to solve a problem or benefit from an opportunity or create some whole new project, sometimes all three at once. So these people meet several times and they come up with a new proposal. The new proposal comes back to the next business meeting, and chances are it completely is passed, is approved. Nobody blocks, vetoes it because they helped create it. But let's say that the people who blocked it, who vetoed it, won't get together with those other people, or they do, and they have a series of meetings, but they go nowhere because they're not on the same page and they're just fighting a lot. If so, there is no new proposal. So the advocates bring the original proposal back to the next business meeting, and they have a supermajority vote of, drum roll please, 67%. Holy mackerel. 67% means that puppy is going to pass like that, because that's such a huge amount of people. I mean, such a low amount of people who are advocates for the proposal who want it, who will pass it. So there's quite an incentive for people who block or veto a proposal to get together with the other folks. And that's how the in-street consensus method works. Another modified form is Earth Haven's decision-making method, which is based on the in-street method. It's a modified form. And so there's a handout also in the Google Drive folder that you will get a link to that says exactly how we did it and why, and exactly step by step how we do the method that we do. Okay, so what is sociocracy? There will be a handout and a slide deck and lots of videos and lots of things in your Google Drive folder. I imagine you're fairly familiar with sociocracy, but if not, these are things that you can, resources that can help you get a sense of it. So what is it? It's a governance and decision-making method. It uses feedback questions or evaluation questions when making proposals and when consenting to proposals. And then later on, we ask the evaluation questions of the implemented proposal. It could be a policy proposal. Here in our finance committee, we require you to give us a voucher saying, what did you buy and why, and what committee did you buy it on the behalf of, and how much did you spend? And we'll have it signed by the chairperson of your committee. And if you do that, but except in sociocracy committees are called circles, nevertheless, you know what I'm saying. So then, and you have to attach the receipt. That's a policy. That's not a physical thing. And if we don't like this policy after a while, we can change it because we're asking evaluation questions about it after we've implemented the policy. Do people actually staple the receipt to the voucher? Do they actually give us a voucher? Do they fill out the voucher properly? Do they get the voucher signed by an official person in that circle or committee? And if not, we adjust things in order to help make the proposal function properly to solve the problem of our finance committee, our finance circle doesn't exactly know why people want to get reimbursed for these things they went and bought, and do we even know that the community needed them? Or it could be a physical thing like a fence, and the evaluation questions that we ask later are, does the fence seem to be keeping the deer out, or whatever the reason we have the fence? Does it seem to be not falling apart? We ask this, months later. And is there anything we could learn from this, putting up the fence? What do members think about this fence? So we might want to alter the fence to the degree we can, but a fence is hard to alter once you put it there, right? So we might just take notes about how to do a better fence later if we ever need another fence. So again, the three aspects of sociocracy are governance. It's a governance structure. It includes, but is not limited to, decision-making. And we have feedback loops or feedback questions, which I call evaluation questions, built into proposals. What's the purpose of sociocracy? To organize work tasks and create ourselves to be a more harmonious group. What are the three values? Transparency. We all know everything going on in our community because we can read the minutes. And also when we're in a circle, meaning a committee, we get the news about the whole community from one of the representatives that goes to the general circle, which is kind of like a coordinating circle. Equivalence of voice in any given circle. Nobody's the boss. The shy people don't stay quiet and you never call on them. The loud and obnoxious people will have a lot to say about everything. Don't dominate the meeting. It's extremely fair. Equivalence of voice in each circle. And effectiveness. These arrows hitting the targets mean we get the job done. We know what work tasks we need to do in terms of policies, in terms of physical projects, and we get them done effectively and efficiently, and we measure and evaluate how well we did. Okay, there are 7 parts the way I see it. The circle structure itself. Here's a little picture of an example circle structure from a community in Massachusetts in the US. And what people do in policy meetings. They do proposal forming, asking evaluation questions in proposals. This little icon here means evaluation questions because you create the proposal and then you look at it again and you might change it later. This is known to engineers as feedback loops, but since we're probably not engineers, I just call it evaluation questions. Consent decision-making, which is similar and different from consensus. Selecting people for roles in the circle, roles in the community, role improvement. Feedback, which is how the person in a role chooses a feedback team to give them beautifully organized way to do it, really a clear way to do feedback to help them do their role even better. And consenting to circle members. People don't just join committees or circles, they apply to join, and the group consents to them if they need another person and they want to work with that person. And sometimes they say, no, thank you, not at this time. We have enough people. So I consider the 7 parts of sociocracy like the 7 parts of a bicycle. You need all of the parts. If you take away the handlebars, you can still ride the bike, but it's not as easy. If you take away the seat, you can ride standing up, but it's not as easy and you might get tired. If you take away the pedals, you can still go forward, but you have to push your foot along the ground like a child with a scooter. So each time you don't use a part of sociocracy, it's analogous to having a bicycle, but taking off one of the parts. The parts of sociocracy, as I see it, and I've been teaching it since 2012, specifically to intentional communities, and not just in the US, but worldwide. So not so much now, because there's plenty of sociocracy teachers all over Europe and all over everywhere. In any case, what I would always say is that the 7 parts are mutually beneficial and mutually reinforcing, just like the parts of a bike. What else can we tell you? It was created by Gerard Indenburg, an electrical engineer in the Netherlands in the 1960s. There are benefits of sociocracy and intentional communities: better meetings, getting more done, being better organized, and feeling more connected to other group members. How do I know this? Well, I gathered up all kinds of comments that were on YouTube videos, that were in emails to me personally, that were in magazine articles, and that were parts of other sociocracy trainers' work. I put them all together, and I saw that all of these comments, positive comments by people who live in intentional communities, were in fact naturally clustered into these 4 areas: better meetings, getting more done, and so on. So here are some comments. We've made more decisions in the past 2 months than we have in the past 2 years. These are real people in real communities. People are happier and more satisfied and getting more things done. Information flows better and we have better follow-up to our decisions. The meeting process creates a sense of connectedness. Just some examples. I have learned that there are 4 necessary conditions for intentional communities to use sociocracy effectively. If these conditions are not met, there is a tendency for sociocracy to be done inaccurately, done only partially, and triggering lots of conflict in the community. So community consultants come along and say, oh my God, this sociocracy thing is terrible. Don't use that. Use classic traditional consensus because it's good for you. And if you have conflict, it's good for you because then you can get to know your community members better. Okay, so everybody learns it is one of my 4 necessary conditions, meaning don't just have the cognoscenti, the Illuminati know how to do it, and the rest of us hoi polloi don't know what's going on. No, we've got to teach everybody. Use all 7 parts, not just some. Use as your trainer taught you. Don't mash it together with consensus or majority rule voting or supermajority voting or some such thing. Keep it as sociocracy or it just won't work very well. And get periodic review trainings or workshops or consultations if you have a question. Okay, that's what I suggest about community governance, which is modified consensus where there's recourse if someone blocks or vetoes a proposal, or sociocracy. These 2 I highly recommend now for intentional communities of any and all kinds. Why? Because they tend to create more harmony and more goodwill. Well, why is that? Because we approve, consent to, pass more proposals more often, we get more done, and we feel better in meetings, and there isn't the kind of awful conflict that can happen. Okay, here is another thing regarding what a positive community dynamic can be, which I call effective community management. Many communities, community founders, do not know how much administrative time it takes to manage a community effectively. So they don't build this amount of time into their expectations. Since, as we all know from all the years we've lived in and or researched communities, the community is only and solely about holding hands in the meadow and singing Kumbaya. There's really nothing else required, is there? Community will be handed to us on a platter. Oh, thank you. I'll take some. We don't have to actually do any work. But Yoda does wonder where we're going to get the work done and how we're going to organize it. So we need, when we're founding a community, being a
So a
consultant.
few more minutes, Diana.
Thank you. When founding a community or being a consultant to a community, we need to let people know that it takes a lot of time. Okay, so when we don't do that, too few people work too hard, accomplishing too little, leading to what I call structural conflict, which is where there are great big missing pieces of what we don't have in the community. And here are some of the things, and I'm going to go through this quickly. This slide deck will be there for folks to read. So any of these things you can see when you read it more slowly, if you like, in the slide deck, which will be in the Google Drive. So 2 more good things we can do for positive community dynamics. Asking for help on an email social list, which is what we do here at Earth Haven and many communities do. Offering things to the community to give away. Thanking people. These are real emails from my community that I just pasted into here this morning. Thanking people for the work they did. This is a long email about our Beltane Festival. People are being thanked up and down, right, left, and center. So there will be a link to this. I was told that I can share with you upcoming online workshops I'm doing. So I do one on conflict that covers a whole lot of these things. And shoot, I put the wrong one on here. Sociocracy part 1 and part 2 is what I wanted to show you. I'll correct this before the slide deck. And so you'll find the slide deck further on, in the folder. And so thank you very much for considering these ideas. That's the slideshow.
Wonderful. Thank you, Diana. That was like really very rich, I would say. Yeah. So I really invite you to, save your questions a bit. I mean, if there's something like really prompt, you have a question in terms of understanding, maybe we can clarify this now directly, because now we have another presentation coming, probably also very rich, so that your questions won't get lost. Or, of course, you can drop them for you on a paper or in the chat. Yeah, is there any urgent question? Okay. So Imran?
Yes, I just had this question. I would like to know more about this sociocracy. How does it work? Actually, I've read about it, but I haven't been able to understand it yet fully. So how to put it into practice, actually?
Well, it's an investment of time and energy to learn how to do it because there are 7 parts. It's not as simple as a modified consensus process, and it's not as simple as majority rule voting or supermajority voting. It's not only for making decisions, it's for making proposals as well as making decisions on those proposals, selecting people for roles in the community, helping the people get better at the roles, and helping people join circles or committees. Also, there's a governance structure. I teach it in 2 classes. One is a 6-week class, and that's part 1, and one is a 5-week class, that's part 2. So it's a bit of an investment to learn it. It tends to create wonderful benefits when the group uses it correctly and they use all the parts, or it can create dreadful conflict if they don't. So that's my quick answer. And you will find information about it in the link to the Google document, and I'll stick that in the chat now.
Yeah,
would be great.
wonderful. Yeah, because of course it needs, the members of the community need to be like really into it and incorporate it to really realize it. So that's my experience also from the communities where I was living, and many communities, they change it a little bit so that it fits better to their structure, right? Diana, do you also?
Well, I advise people not to do that because of all the conflict I then see. But you can only lead a horse to water, you can't make that horse drink. So if people don't want to keep it the way it has been designed and they change it, they'll get the results, which may benefit them if they don't change it very much, but it may actually trigger conflict if they change it more than a little bit. So I'm kind of nervous about that myself.
Yeah, indeed. And also, I mean, how we combined it in Siebenlinden is with the systemic consenting, which is another method of how to make the decisions. So it's not yes and no decisions, but it's on a scale from 0 till 10, for instance. And that really helps a lot to combine this kind of decision making with sociocracy. So that's really very helpful. But maybe I can send information, or I can tell something later if there's interest.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you
Good.
very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes.
So,
Hello, can you hear me?
Jan, yeah, we can.
Good. I have an idea, a thought that the way a community governs itself develops and changes over time. And there are basically three major agents of change. One is the age of the community. And as people get to know each other, and as they learn from each other, they change the way they decide things. The other is the size of a community. There's a tremendous difference between a community of 10 people and a community of 100 people and a community of 1,000 people. And of course, a lot of the changes will also come about due to your national legal systems. Because there are legal systems that you have to abide to that differ between different countries. So I think that there should be a dynamic of change built into governance. That was my. Thank you.
Mm. When
I was, if you have the time,
Yeah, or maybe you save it till after Steve has talked.
all right.
Then we have another rich experience, because Steve will present a case of a community with the dynamics and the whole process of the governance. And I think that's also very exciting. And definitely, I mean, I would also be interested to dive into this a bit more. What are actually the frames? Like Jan, you said, the legal frames, and also the ownership, the economic model of the community. Because if there's a single owner and the other ones are just renting out the place, for instance, that's the difference. But if they're all co-owners of a cooperative or foundation, this is a completely different situation than also for the decision making and the governance, I would say. Yeah, but just as another thing to have in mind when we listen to Steve now. So, and Stephen Lloyd-Moffett is a professor of comparative religious and cultural studies at California Polytech State University, right?
Yep.
In St. Louis.
Yeah, San Luis Obispo, yeah.
Yeah, and he has a deep interest and also long-term experience and research in the intersection of spirituality, intentional communities, and governance. And he also researches how religious and philosophical traditions shape communal values, decision-making processes, and social cohesion. And Steve also has experience with other movements, not just intentional communities, right? Like movements, I mean, religious communities, religious, like monasteries, monastic communities. Yeah. And so he studied a range of these different community models. And yeah, he is also co-founder and resident of the Lavra, a community living space in California. And I think he will tell us about this community today as well, because of course he's very deep into it.
Yes, thanks, Iris, and and thanks, Diana. It's great. We'll have a nice balance because you kind of talked about some governance issues that fit for everybody, and then I'll sort of bring in some contemporary issues that we've dealt with that impact your choice of, for example, decision-making processes. As Iris said, I actually studied monks originally. Lived in or visited 100 different monasteries in my 20s, mostly Greek Orthodox and Hindu, though some Catholic and Buddhist. I eventually went and did my couple of masters and a PhD on monasticism. I started studying intentional communities maybe about 15 years ago as I was looking for a new way to live for myself, but I had a couple of kids already, so a monastery was not going to be there. We started traveling and becoming involved in ICSA. I think we joined the board in 2016. My wife, Amy, and I have probably visited 100 different communities over the years before starting our own community here in California. But I just want to start off by telling a story of I went to Brisbane to meet up with Bill Metcalf, now one of our esteemed elders in the study of community. And had just a wonderful day with him. And at the end, I was like, "So, Bill, how do you make this successful? Give me like the one sentence." And he thought for a second and said, "You have to have a really strong, all-powerful guru at the start of a community, and then they need to die just at the right time." And that's been sort of guiding us over the last 13 years, and we didn't want to follow that, but we still rely on Bill and Tim Miller, Don Pitzer, Jan, of course, and all those as we've thought about it. So I'm going to share basically our governance journey as a sort of case study of some of the things from outside that affected us that we had not anticipated. As you said, I've actually studied a lot of contemporary religious communities. Most of those have been guru-based. And to be honest, many times the guru either died or was put in prison, not at the right time. But we can talk about those in the Q&A, or my next project is Amy and I will be in Denmark looking at co-housing and eco-villages. So I'm happy to talk about that. So let me share with you our little slide deck here, and I will talk about governance in our community here. Okay, so where did this start? Well, a couple of years before our community founded, we penned a manifesto that was an attempt to articulate the need and form of communal living that we thought fit well for California in the 2010s. It's full of poetic language and lofty ideals that makes us cringe a bit now, but the gist of it was as follows. Our society needs more options on how to live to promote thriving. Some people are totally happy with the way the options out there, but too many people were living lonely, alone lives, functionally like hermits squirreled away in isolated dwellings. By contrast, there's a certain segment of society that had desired to live communally, and my image at the time was the commune of 50 people living in a house. That's the Source family in Los Angeles. I hadn't studied them that much at the time, but my impression were communes where 100% of the resources were shared had not been successful. And so our hope was to create something in between, a middle option for people who valued their privacy and independence, but wanted the benefits of living communally. And since I'd studied historical monasticism, this model seemed like the Lavra model, which was trying to be something between hermits and the classic monastery. So what was the Lavra model? Well, the Lavra model thrived in Palestine between the 5th and the 11th century, where before you had monks who were hermits who lived alone in caves, and then you had the classic monastery, which we call cenobium, or living together, where you have a monastic house led by an abbot. Well, the Lavra sought that in between. At the center of the Lavra, there was a common house that had a refectory and a chapel. Then out from this central building were a series of pathways where people lived in various huts and houses, either in 2, 3, 4, or 5. They lived independently and accepted a sort of wide variety of beliefs, but then they would gather on Sunday for a worship and a meal. As a famous church father said, a lavra is a place where the dwelling places are separate and distinct, but the common life accomplishes a single goal, divine love. It was called the lavra because in ancient Greek, the term lavra was a meeting point where paths crossed and people gathered. Lavras were known as where the village came together and maybe gossiped a little bit. And so we called our community the Lavra because we hoped to create a series of dwellings where people lived by themselves or couples or more. And then there was a central house that was the hub of the building. Our plan was to meet formally just once a week, but instead of church, we would gather together for a potluck and work together. Otherwise, people lived independent lives with much informal gathering. We founded that community in 2012. The number of people who live there has vacillated from 6 to 18, but we found the sweet spot was 8 to 12, given the natural constraints of things like drawing from a single well. And people still live in tiny homes and yurts and tree houses, manufactured homes, all sorts of inventive dwellings. Formally, still meet just once a week, but now there are tons of events and workshops, and that went in a direction we hadn't intended, but there's lots of public events now. In terms of governance, we had read about a ton of communities, visited dozens at that point. But one thing that really stood out for us was as we read about historical communities, and especially in the 1960s and 70s in America, they almost always had a sentence like 10 families each contributed $5,000 and we bought 100 acres. Well, $50,000, even adjusted for inflation, wasn't going to buy a postage stamp in California. The average property in our area at the time was $750,000. Now it is about $1.2 million. Amy and I could put all of our money in, borrow from family, but we would still have a massive mortgage to pay off for the next 30 years. And given the fact that the mortgage was going to be around $500,000, banks were very clear that they were not going to rent to cooperatives or multiple owners. This is particularly after the financial meltdown of 2008. They wanted single owners with great credit, lots of collateral, and perhaps a note from a priest saying we were trustworthy. And I think our final loan documents were over 100 pages back in the day. Furthermore, even if we could find some sort of joint ownership, none of the people we knew who was interested in living communally had access to meaningful funds to create equality or near equal states. And so from the beginning, it was going to be a single ownership with Amy and I on the deed. We didn't want a guru model. We didn't want to be dictators. So we wanted some semblance of equality. So we wanted to create a model that didn't actually, that contributed where people felt equal, even if they couldn't contribute financially to the same way. And so what did we do? Well, our challenge was this financial reality of a single owner, but wanting communal decision-making. And so we established a nonprofit, the Lavra Community Foundation. And then Amy and I leased the entire property to the Lavra Community Foundation for the price of the mortgage, taxes, and insurance. So technically we own the property as individuals, but residents would interact solely with the nonprofit. We stated the goal was to one day transfer ownership to the nonprofit once we could pay off the mortgage. We initially created 2 tiers of residents, temporary members who were planning to live there for a year or 2, and those whose intention it was to live there on an ongoing basis, which we called permanent members. Only permanent members were part of the governing board that could make, quote, important decisions that affected the long-term form and function of the community. That's the language we used. During regular meetings, both permanent and temporary members would usually be there. Our consensus, our model was not pure consensus. We ended up with consensus -1. So, you needed more than one person to block anything. But in something that would foreshadow future problems, the bylaws also said that Amy and I had a veto on issues related to the land, since we were the ones who were the actual owners of it. It was interesting, we've forgotten we had put that in, but that would foreshadow a lot of issues for us going forward. For all other decisions, everybody participated, and it was consensus -1 is what we chose. I want to mention one other scheme we developed to incentivize permanent members for taking ownership of the community. We created a Lavra ownership credit system where you could earn credits of ownership based on the number of days you lived at the Lavra. So here's how it worked. In our thought, Amy and I may be the names on it, but essentially the bank owns our land. And so the member should benefit from the sweat labor because, after all, the value of it is determined by the new buildings, the new farm areas, new common spaces, the things we are creating together. And so each month we would calculate the value of the Lavra, basically the amount of the bank loan we had paid off, divided by the number of permanent members resident, and create shadow accounts for the monetary value of the portion of the land that they now owned. Initially, this ended up being about $6,000 to $8,000 a year per member. Now, this account would only vest after 4 years, so you had to be there for 4 years to take away from that account. But if you left after 4 years, you walked away with actual money. So, for example, if you left after 5 years, you might end up with $30,000 or $40,000. And so then there was an idea that you're not just throwing away your contribution, you're actually investing in a property together. This was the idea. And by the way, this applied to Amy and me too. We were earning Lavra credits just like everybody else. Now, there's so much more in the Lavra Community Agreement. I think it's 12 pages long, that initial one, but I want to leave time for why it failed, or should I say, how it evolved into different plans over the years. So what changed our original agreement? Well, first, the affordability crisis. The median home price in California is out of control. It is so expensive to live here. Only 16% of Californians can afford to buy a house here. This meant with such a huge mortgage, insurance, and taxes each month, there was a ton of pressure to fill spaces as quickly as possible just so we could afford our mortgage. And I think this reality led to a rush to find people to fill spots and overlook some red flags. So we would have loved to have a long application process or develop relationships for lengthy periods before moving in or invest in cooperative team building exercises. But you just couldn't afford to not have people there because we had a mortgage to pay. And so sometimes we would pick the available candidate rather than the best candidate. Relatedly, this meant we decided that we wanted to make it affordable so that everybody could be there. So this initially meant $400 a month rent for everybody, or contributions, we called it, and then 16 hours of work at the community. Well, at $400, we are the cheapest place to live in the entire county. The average in the county was over $1,000. This meant that we attracted a number of people who were drawn to live with us because it was the cheapest place to live. Now, they weren't, they would say, give a lot of lip service to how much they love community, how much they want to try it. And I don't think anyone, was anti-community, but it also meant they weren't first communitarians. They would put in their minimum time and effort, but their goal was to live cheaply. It also meant when conflicts arose, in almost every instance, no one ever wanted to leave because leaving meant doubling or tripling or quadrupling their living expenses. And so it was hard to disentangle the desire for inexpensive housing versus the desire to live as a community. The second issue involved sort of my imagined dream, which was one of my favorite communities I visited was one called La Selva. It's outside of Santa Cruz. And this community has 5 families who lived for 35 years on the same piece of land and raised their kids communally. They sleep in small cabins, but they share a large central house that has the only kitchen on the property and a shower room. And their big advice to me after thriving for 35 years was they've never once had a meeting in 35 years. Instead, they've had dinner every night for 35 years. So their big motto was less meeting, more eating. And the key to the success was really they saw each other every morning, literally in a common shower room. And then they would come together at the end of every evening in a shared meal. And they had incredible stability. And living together. Now, we didn't want to have every meal together, but I think Amy and I really imagined this long-standing, stable community of people dedicated over the long term towards creating this vision we had. But the problem was it never really worked out because most people today do not have 9-to-5 jobs. They leave in the morning and come back at a regular time. Especially millennials and Gen Z value flexibility, working from home, working atypical hours. They're always thinking of changing jobs, looking for new employment. People wanted to travel. So things like regular nightly dinners seemed really strange to people. It also meant that finding consistent patterns were difficult. People wanted to travel. People wanted to sort of go work for 2 weeks in a cabin in the woods. I mean, people valued flexibility. It also meant that no one really imagined staying in one place for very long. So if we wanted to create a community of stable individuals who invest in the long term, it just never developed. We've had over 60 residents and only one person has ever lasted more than 4 years. So that our system where LAVRA credits vested ended up just dying at the vine because no one stayed that long. And it wasn't because there was conflict. It was because they got a job in another city. They decided to go date somebody in another city. They were going to take an internship in Europe, or Australia or something. And so, yeah, we did have people leave because of conflict, but for the most part, people left to go do really cool things around the world. So when we suggested people commit to a single community for years, the idea was definitely not appealing to most people. Long-term commitment to a community project felt like a sentence to most of the residents. But living for a short period in eco-farm intentional community, that was something people wanted to check off their bucket list. But our schema for distributing ownership of LAVRA just simply died because no one stayed long enough, right? And over time, it came the perception that everybody was sort of temporary and only Amy and I were the common people. Furthermore, it also changed our decision-making. For example, we have literally dozens of projects started by somebody who then left without finishing it, or projects that withered on the vine when people left. And so how we began to think of decision-making changed too. Should all people get an equal say in the project, even though they're going to leave for 3 months after 3 months? And why we never really said it out loud, but if someone said, oh, let's dedicate $5,000 to building an aquaponic system, Amy and I would eventually say, oh God, we know where this is going. They're going to build it, they're going to get halfway done, and then they're going to get a job in another city and move on. Why get excited if everybody is actually temporary? And then on the flip side, how do we make people feel integrated and truly belong if they don't have a say in what goes on in the community? And a silly example, but early on, we had our first set of goats that were born. And we've had over 14 or 15 goats born. And Amy and I and some of the long-term members at the time knew we were going to see these goats every freaking morning milking them. And so if new members literally wanted to call one of the new goats Goaty McGoatface, should they have an equal say when they're not going to be around to milk them? And so we began to say, and just the first time that we remember saying long-term members got more of a say than temporary members because we have to call our goats every morning. But it really foreshadowed some of the issues that came in. If people have different horizons for how long they're going to stay in a community, that really changed their say in the community. Third issue. Housing regulations in California are out of control. We live in the most regulated state in the nation and probably one of the most regulated places in the world. This meant, and it's all designed around single family homes. We have 5 acres, but we legally could only have people living in the main house. Now, we could make the main house 10,000 square meters with 25 bedrooms, but we weren't allowed to build 8 detached bedroom cabins. And so we were always in gray areas with the county. We would have all of our buildings eventually permitted, but not for the reasons that they were permitted for. Well, how did this affect governance? Well, all residents knew we were vulnerable to the county inspectors putting a red tag. Red tag is when they say this is an unsafe building. This, in effect, gave every member, even the most temporary member, someone who stayed with us for a few weeks, a veto. Because if a conflict would emerge, or people didn't want to contribute to energy, their energy or money, they threatened to go to the county and turn us in. This happened twice for us, but it meant that politically, the structures we had for decision making didn't account that everybody had a veto, because they could ruin the community simply with a phone call to the county. So this really sort of changed decision making, and it came up many times. The fourth and final issue I will mention is the litigiousness of America. America is a land where lawsuits are out of control. In fact, I was just talking to our insurance agency agent, and she was trying to get us not to have anybody over to our community. And she said, I won't even have anyone to dinner at my house, even friends, because lawsuits you're just going to get sued. And so we became deathly afraid of lawsuits. There were a couple lawsuits between members, or threats of lawsuits between members over accidents. But here's the important part. In each of those threats of lawsuits, Amy and I got letters from lawyers, not because we were involved, we weren't even there, but because we were the owners of the property. And so this meant, because our name was on the property, it meant that we were liable even when we weren't even present. And this meant that if community members say, hey, we want to have axe throwing or something like that, well, if something went wrong, Amy and I got sued. And this really broke down our governance method, because we had liability that other people in the community didn't. Furthermore, eventually our insurance company dropped us, because the people on the mortgage, Amy and I, weren't officially living on the property. We were renting it to a nonprofit. And so the insurance company said, we will not insure you unless you drop this whole renting to a nonprofit scheme. And so we had to disassociate the nonprofit from the property. This meant that now people, instead of writing checks to the nonprofit or their history, they had to write checks to Amy and I. This really changed our dynamic, because during one particularly heightened meeting, someone finally just stood up and yelled, look, you call this a community, and our monthly check contributions and our work, seva or volunteer labor, but let's be honest, you two are landlords, we're renters, we have rights, and we can sue. This was what we really hoped to avoid in the whole process in it. So to summarize, our imagined community had stable, dedicated communitarians who shared risk and reward. Our reality was most people were temporarily untethered. The results, they had different timelines, different constraints, different fears shaping their view. They had different financial and legal responsibilities rooted in underlying ownership structures. And we learned that our precarious zoning situation gave people power, and that's something termed negative people weren't afraid to use. So our story is probably similar to others. We had lofty dreams of equal community comprised of dedicated communitarians who shared the vision, and that's not exactly how it played out. And we evolved over the years. So let me just wrap up by sharing what our current governance is. Amy and I left the community about a year ago when she got a job at another university in California. We thought it was time to try some new adventures for us. The farm manager is now the new Lavra director, responsible for organizing the community. There are 9 people living there now, still having about 40 public events a year. Amy and I still own the property, and we visit frequently. We collect enough rent to cover the mortgage, insurance, and taxes and some maintenance, but we've dedicated not to make any money from it. We monitor what happens. We visit. If something gets too risky, we might say something. But since we no longer have the dual role of community members and property owners, we're just property owners supporting the community members, the relational dynamics are less convoluted. We have no problem acting as landlords who are supporting community and trying to support them. We offer input, and practically, I still have to do most of the maintenance because I'm the only one who really understands how this complex property works, but it is evolved into its own thing. I think in the end, our story brings up a few questions, and I'll end with these because I think they're universally applicable. If the way we've all lived has changed, how does shared governance need to change? I mean, if people see living in community as a 1, 2, 3, or until something comes up better environment, how does that change who votes and who gets a say and so forth? Second, how does the affordability crisis shape ownership structures? We have, there's just vast wealth inequality, especially in America, and ownership costs are out of reach for most people. And so how do you avoid competing classes of community members? And third, how does this sort of outside legal and regulatory environment shape foundational agreements between community members? I mean, we exist in a place where litigiousness, codes, all these things have a dire effect, but they don't affect people equally. If the lottery gets red tagged, we still are paying the mortgage. Other people could find new places to live. And so I think those are sort of ways that shape externalities that shape how people think of governance, at least in our context. So hopefully there's a lot to chew on there, and open to any questions or comments on it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve, very much in the time frame also. Great. So, wow, that was a really deep and honest sharing of your experience, and that's really valuable to hear that. So, wow, with all the ups and downs and also the process and what you have learned out of it, I think that's really valuable to see. And now also in combination with what we have heard from Diana, with the different forms of decision making, I think that's extremely interesting to discuss a little bit. So what kind of decision making system and governance will work out how the best and in which frame? And you posed also the question, okay, now we have different frames, so maybe we need different forms of governance. Yeah, our lives have changed. Young people are not so committed anymore, and we have to deal with it and just take it and organize around it. This is what I heard. And wow. Yeah, so however, maybe there are questions from others, from you. So what have you heard and how did you inspire? Yeah, Diana.
My heart was going out to you and to Amy. I have heard this story for decades. Not this story, but these things. And I think that the frame, Iris, that, okay, so what kind of community governance would have helped here? And I think that question is several steps later after some first steps, which are, unfortunately, and this is all too common and it's nobody's fault, your community was started with what I would call some type 1 errors in permaculture, or structural conflict that was things you didn't know. And how could you know? You'd actually never created a community, especially in California with its zoning, strict zoning regulations and high property values. How could you have known? Let's say you and I had had a conversation, and this was after I had learned what I had learned. I think I would have been able to share with you and Amy some things to do and not do that could have prevented a whole lot of that. It's quite often the case that when rent is much lower than the average rent in any given area, it attracts like moths to a flame people who care nothing about community and want the cheap rent and ignore all of the community values and mission and purpose just so they can get that cheap rent. It's not uncommon. I've heard of it before. Also, people who live in a community or a human settlement where there's landlords and you rent sets people up to believe they're going to have far more power than they do. So to talk baldly and directly about power, landlords have all the power. They can say yes to some people to rent and no to others. They can sell off this part of the property. They can mortgage the property and buy more. They can cut down trees, build a pond, drain a pond. They can do anything. And so what's very helpful is what I have developed called Rights and Responsibilities of Renters and Owners, which is a very clear description of what I as a renter can do and don't have to do because you do it, and what I am obligated to do, but what I'm not obligated to do because you do it, and what my benefits are. And in the very same document, the owners, very same thing, rights and responsibilities, and we all sign it, 2 copies. And then I can't later say, you're treating me like a second-class citizen. I thought this was a community. I thought I could do this and this. Well, no, you can't because you're a renter. It's also very helpful to allow all the community members to have decision-making on who joins as a new renter. I think a really good thing to do is to not call it a community, but to call it a congenial rental situation in a community-like setting or something like that, because it doesn't set people up to think that it's a community in the usual sense. And there are multiple other things. I think what legal entity you have affects what you can do, and what you can do affects what decision-making method you have and what agreements that you have. And so I would suggest that you use supermajority voting, because the people who have the least amount of investment in the place can't really stop proposals. And when you mentioned the goaty goat face, that was really very funny and also kind of awful, because you're right. Why should that person have full decision-making rights? So sometimes what people do is, like you do, full ongoing continuous members and temporary, and you have to know in advance who's temporary, right? Or decisions made precisely and solely by the owners, and it's all listed, and it's in that rental rights and agreements form, and decisions that everybody makes, like when do we have lunch, which doesn't matter so much. So I just had quite a response to what you said.
Yeah, I could tell. Yeah, we had pages of, we had rental agreements, or we called them trustee agreements with each one, and we had all those set up. I mean, the challenge for us in that environment, and we had very clear, 12-page agreement on everything. Challenge for us was to we wanted to get around the single ownership, and because we knew this was going to be an issue, that it was. And so, so much of those first years were creating these mechanisms for getting around it, like the nonprofit, like the ownership credits. But I think creating the permanent versus the temporary members, or, ongoing members. The problem is everybody was temporary in the end.
Yes.
Just because, and it wasn't because people would get in fights, although, I mean, that did happen. But in the end, it's just people live differently. And so, so let's say somebody comes in and I want to be a, ongoing member. I could see myself here for 20 years. And then they meet online somebody in Georgia. And, are we going to tell them, don't follow your love, And so that distinction between ongoing and not ongoing just functionally didn't exist in the end. We thought there was. And then people who came in for 2 weeks ended up staying for 3 years. So it just functionally didn't make a difference.
Really difficult, yeah. But I think, then there should be, in our minds at least, a balance that the power and the responsibility should be mirrored somehow.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's difficult to have this like really in the concrete case to apply this. But yeah, this is
And it-
absolutely, and also in all kind of communities and movements. I mean, we have researched more than 100 in a European research project where we exactly found out about this case. It's so difficult. And if there is a structure that at least gives some frame for responsibility, then it can be done, the decision making. But as in your case, if there are owners, then of course this needs to be met somehow. And
Yeah, maybe I can
I
answer Nicholas's question here on the chat.
yeah, I just
Dr.
wanted to say
Soto.
that there are questions in
Yeah.
the chat.
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
that's a really interesting way of framing it, Nicholas, because I think really that sort of psychosocial element was because Amy and I, or a few of the long-term people, just had a very different relationship to the community and the land. You know, we were thinking, oh, so much of our heart and identity is tied to this, which led to a different sort of relationship than the person who was, oh yeah, I'm here, but I'm also a nurse. I also am connected to my family back in, Washington. I have all these different sort of elements to it. And so it was very hard to meet as peers or as a common community because just people felt differently connected to it. Wasn't a part of their identity in the same way it was for some of us who were at the beginning. We also, and I didn't mention this, Nicholas, but one of the couples that was there at the beginning and stayed the longest, one of the members committed suicide in the midst of us all living there. And this was just understandably just trauma for all of us. Not only losing a founder of the community, but losing one of our best friends and through a lot of functions. Those of us who kind of went through that had a different relationship with each other and with the community than people who came in and were like, oh, who's that guy? Why are you guys talking? Why is his name up in the garden? Like, who's this? And so it just created a very different dynamic by those who had kind of gone through trauma together and sort of come out the other side of it. And so really, I think, Nicholas, your point about the psychosocial connection and stuff is very interesting. And then related to that too, it was very hard. I mean, we now are a lot better at kind of discerning on who is there for being cheap and who's there for being a communitarian. We tend to have a lot more longer processes of connecting with people in things, but it was very hard to kind of see people who we would see a pattern of people super excited about the community, doing a ton of stuff in the first initial months. And then when things got hard or there's a goat birth in the middle of the night, suddenly it wanes. So sort of sorting out who were kind of truly communitarians and who weren't was a really hard part of thinking through people's psychic relationship to their living environment. So good question.
May I add something?
Diana.
Yeah.
I'll just be very brief. In my experience, this is quite often the case with communities where there's owners that own the land, like one or two people, or a family, and then renters. This is extremely common among communities that are organized that way, so much so that I have suggested they don't call themselves communities, but rather human settlements with a community-like atmosphere. The communities where people buy in have much lower turnover, even though members might have to go back to Minnesota and take care of their parents, or for all the reasons that Steve just said. But what I'm thinking is when people pay money to join a community and they invest with some of their money and they build a house, as in Siebenlinden, as at Earth Haven where I live, they are committed and they make the rest of their life fit around the community rather than using the community as a simple home base from which they go everywhere and also leave. And so I think we who are looking at communities should distinguish between rental situation communities, which have often plagued with these issues, and communities where you buy in because there's a different set of things that happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Yeah, it's really good to hear that again. So are there more questions from the audience? I really would encourage
I
you.
see Beatrice has a question about the pandemic and governance. One thing that I would say on that is it sort of froze everybody for a couple of years. I mean, California was in a pretty strong lockdown and nobody was moving. We, fortunate with our climate, we could meet outside a lot. But I think it sort of just froze everybody. Everybody kind of realized you weren't going to move and nobody was going to change the situation. So let's just sort of freeze in it. But I mean, in some sense, it contributed to the conviviality because we would hang out in ways that, weren't as open to hanging out with outside groups. But it did kind of, everybody was just under lockdown and not willing to, not entertaining changing at all.
Thank you. There was another question earlier on in the chat from Nicholas, I guess it's answered, concerning the measurements, the legal frame and so on, I think.
Yeah, it was answered. Thank you.
Mm.
Addressed it. So yes, it was
Yeah.
answered. And thank you for both for your presentations. It's insightful.
And Beatrice, you have a question to Diana?
Yeah, it's a curiosity. It's for Diana. It's about when she first shared sociocracy at the Colombian Eco-Village Gathering, the Lamado de la Montaña, I think 2012.
Yes.
And how did the network, because there are especially volunteer-driven regions like Casa Latina that was born in that year, and Casa
Yes,
Brasil
it was born at that
followed.
meeting. It was born at that meeting, Beatrice.
Yeah, and I actually am a volunteer in these two networks. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about it and if they later reach out for more support as they began using it, because I've arrived quite only 5 years ago in the network as a volunteer. So I don't really know how it went there.
Here, very quickly, so we can hear from other folks. I met Carlos Rojas, who was the co-founder of Aldea Feliz in a little village called San Francisco, about an hour and a half north of Bogota. And he brought me back a few years later to teach sociocracy to Aldea Feliz, which had been using sort of half-assed consensus. And I spoke in English, and it was translated rapidly and immediately, quite fast, into Spanish, which helped me learn Spanish a lot better after 4 days of hearing this. And the thing that happened that was immediately after I taught sociocracy to the members of Aldea Feliz and some of their invited guests, they had a casa meeting, and other people came from all around. And the people that I had just taught sociocracy taught in the same way, however, in Spanish, all of these casa volunteers. And I was sitting there with tears in my eyes because all the people that I had taught were teaching it exactly as I had taught, and they were teaching it accurately and well. Aldea Feliz thrived so much with sociocracy that they wrote a magazine article about it in Communities Magazine, and the author said, our meetings have gotten so good that sometimes after our meetings, we get up and dance for joy. And I like to tell people that I teach that sociocracy will make you get up and dance for joy. Well, maybe you have to be in Latin America for this to happen.
Yeah. Thank you, Diana, for this example. Very good to hear that sociocracy is working all over the world. And yeah, because we only have a few minutes left, so I hope it's okay that we maybe do a few minutes longer, and then we could also hear Xenia and give space for her question.
Thank you. I have a question to Professor Lloyd. Actually, I don't know if you remember, but a couple of years ago, I emailed you regarding research on Orthodox monasteries because I did my PhD on American Orthodox monasteries, and I'm writing a book about, like, based on my PhD right now. So my question is, first, I didn't quite understand, do you see this kind of temporarity as a problem in your community, or is it just a fact? And another question is a little bit kind of off topic, but do you observe this issue with temporary membership in monastic communities, let's say in the United States or in other places like Greece, for example? I also did fieldwork in Greece too. So, because I see people come and go, but generally Orthodox monasticism requires lifelong commitment. And now in the United States, we see this increase in monastic membership. So,
Yeah.
yeah, what is
Those are great
actually kind of
questions, Senya.
the issue with membership?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much. Good to connect with you again. Yeah. Around the temporary part is, I just think it's a fact of life now with millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, that people are looking for that flexibility. And so maybe we need to reimagine what communities are. These old ideas that you're going to go into a place and live for a long time is just not where most people are at. There'll still be a rule for that, and I definitely think maybe drawing a couple of these elements together. As Diana was saying, if you've bought into something, you have way more stake and way more put in. And to Anton's comment related here too, I think if it's income sharing, you have much more stake in it because you've actually given up something that and are relying on others. So I think those are mechanisms to create more so. And a question with the Orthodox monasticism, it's interesting. I wrote a book on the monastery in Preveza. Oh, there it is. Yeah, great, cool. Yeah, and one of the things that's not in the book, but one of the things that's interesting is there were 3 non-Greek monks there, and all 3 of them ended up leaving. 2 were American, one was Canadian. So I do think it is something, and it was interesting as I talked to them about monasticism, they were like, yeah, Americans don't want to commit. They this idea of I've made even a vow for life just doesn't sort of hold as much weight in Americans. And so, yes, people will do it. But I think this ethos of, hey, there's, seize the day and find the stuff is ingrained. And so it's hard to overcome. Doesn't mean it's impossible. I think, in a lot of monasteries, as in America, people stay for a very long time and it's great. But
yeah, and then this phenomenon of American converts who join Greek monasteries.
Yeah.
I mean, Greek monasteries are on the rise in the United
Yeah.
States. And also, I don't know how long ago you were in Greece, but I did my fieldwork last year. And
Yeah.
I discovered, I mean, I didn't discover it, but other scholars have already noticed that there is a phenomenon of what they call international monasteries in Greece, meaning that almost half of its membership are internationals from Germany and from all other countries.
Yeah, Australia, there's a lot of Australians of Mount Athos in particular, things like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, there'll always be people who are going to stay committed and find it. But I don't think like monasticism is completely immune to sort of moving on, and so yeah, there is. I mean, and there's also an interesting question of Gen Z. One interesting factor in America is every culture, every year, women are more involved in religion than men. The only example that we have found now is young Gen Z in America, men are way more religious than women. And this is an interesting new phenomenon that is where people are trying to figure out, but it could shape things like Ksenia, the stuff you study too, because they tend to be religious, they tend to be surprisingly conservative, and they tend to be drawn towards a very conservative Catholicism and Orthodoxy. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Do you think monasticism is going to go extinct, and communities that require permanent membership, are they going to go extinct then?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's always a subsegment who will be drawn to it. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
thank you so much. And it was
Mhm.
also very interesting to hear this last question now, I think. So, but I hope, yeah, we can round it up now in a sense here to not go over too much with the time. Some have to leave already. And if you have more questions, join the next webinar, or we can stay in touch. Diana already offered to share her material, and I think Anton has your email, so we can send another email. Yeah.
Great. May I show
Thanks so much.
May I show the slide quite quickly of what everybody can get if they go to the link on the Google Drive? It's right here in front of your eyes.
Yeah, the Google Drive, but I think it doesn't really have worked so far because for some the access is not open, you know. Maybe.
Oh, I'll fix it. I'll fix it.
Yeah.
What I mean is I only just created it, so I have to create the access for all the public. But I wanted you to see what I put so that there's like 11 things. You can click them open, you can keep them,
Yeah.
you can download them, you can have them forever, you can share them with anybody. And
Great.
if you want to email me, I'll tell you more about consensus because you asked. Or no, it was Anton who asked about consensus. And Imran, you asked about sociocracy. Here's my email. Put it in the chat.
Yeah,
Email.
put it in the chat.
I'll absolutely tell you what I know.
And you can send all the information in an email to me, and we will forward it to all the participants of the webinar.
Absolutely.
So you get the
Perfect.
contact.
Thanks, everybody. I got to head out.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, so much. It was very interesting. And good
Okay.
luck.
Take
going
care.
on.
Thank you, Steve.
So I have some last slides. Now everyone is leaving. Just to announce the next webinar and the next ICSA conference. So if I may, hold on, I have to see where I can share. I have some, I don't know, problems here and cannot see.
Try now. Try now.
Yeah. I don't know. I cannot,
I just
cannot
made you
share.
co-host again. I just made you co-host again. Try again.
Okay. So it should work. Yeah, now here it is. Because you are, of course, invited for the next webinar, which is beginning of July. Now, here, this was today. And then we have 40 years celebration of ICSA on July 1st and July 3rd. These are 2 blocks. You can register already. And then we want to invite all of you who are working also scientifically, especially, but also community members, for the call for papers here. It's already open because we have the next ICSA conference in July next year. So it's still more than a year of time till then. On intentional community resilience in an age of uncertainty is the title. But however, if you have a scientific work to present, your PhD or whatever, you are warmly invited to apply, and you can present your paper, your project, whatever, and send it to us. Yeah. Okay. And of course, you can go to the ICSA website and receive the newsletter, become a member, and all of that, what I have presented before. So thank you very much. Anything else to say from my colleagues? Anton, Beatrice is still here. Or otherwise, I will thank Diana, and Steve has left already, very much for your contribution. So valuable, so rich. And you will read from us in the next email then, the follow-ups.
Thank
So
you.
I'm closing. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you so much.